Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share a Kickstarter preview of The Other Side of the Hill from NAC Wargames. This is coming soon to Kickstarter. It is a grand strategy game of World War II. It is for 1 to 4 players, ages 14 and up. There are a variety of different scenarios, playing in as little as 3 hours or as many as 12 hours. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got The Other Side of the Hill. A few things I want to mention before I get stuck in. First of all, I still have kind of a cold, sort of a sinus thing going on. So my voice is a little more nasally than it usually is. I know it's a little nasally in the first place, but it's a little more so right now. So I apologize for that. Also want to mention the fine folks over at NAC Wargames have compensated me for this video. I believe want to be transparent right up front so that you understand that. This is also not going to be a how-to-play video. I guarantee there are going to be a variety of in-depth how-to-play videos for The Other Side of the Hill, and I don't want to be redundant. So what I'm going to do in this video is spend about 30 minutes or so talking about an overview of the game, sharing some of the mechanics and systems that I find very unique, very interesting, and also discussing who I feel is really, really going to enjoy The Other Side of the Hill. Let's jump on in. So I'm going to get this box out of the way. First thing I want to show you are the rule books. And this is a relatively complex game, but I will say that it is not as complex as it may appear at first glance. Important to keep that in mind. So we have 2 rule books and we have a playbook. And some folks might think, whoa, holy cow, all of that material? Well, let me point out, you can play The Other Side of the Hill solitaire. You can play it cooperatively with up to 4 players, and you can play it competitively with up to 4 players. So we have a rule book for competitive play. We have a rule book for solitaire and cooperative play. And then we have our playbook, which has the scenarios, some variants, as well as designer notes. So the reality is, you only have to worry about 1 rule book. Now, I will point out, when you're learning to play The Other Side of the Hill, and you're playing with other players, not just solitaire to learn it, I recommend play it cooperatively. Learn to play cooperatively because then you understand what the responsibilities are for each of the aspects of German High Command. And that way you can segue fairly easily into competitive play. And you are going to want to play competitively with multiple players because that is what really makes this design sing. As a solitaire game, really well done. As a cooperative game, also really well done. But it is the competitive play that makes this design shine. So this is a grand strategy game of World War II, focusing on the German High Command. And each player is going to take on a role in the High Command. So first of all, I'm going to share a look at the rules real quick. I will point out that there are lots of examples. So it is pretty clear when you're reading through the rules about each of the various different steps. But I do think that this rule book could use another go through just for English localization. And there are a few things that should be in the rule books that are not in here, but they're on the player aid cards. And this uses custom dice. And one example is there's no explanation of what those faces on the dice mean, what they represent, but it's on the player aid card. I'd like to see that in the rule book. Now, what I did to teach my best friend Elliot and his son Brian and my nephew Cameron, even my brother Greg tried playing this. He sat in for a little bit with us. I let them take this copy of the game so that they could look through the rules, take a look at the components, and have an idea, as opposed to we all got together and I taught them the rules. When we first started playing, it was slow going because there are a lot of things going on in the other side of the hill. But once you start to understand the basics, you will be in good shape. All right, so as I mentioned, if you're playing with multiple players, let's say you're playing with the full complement of 4 players, you are going to have 4 different heads. So we've got the OKW, who pretty much oversees the direction of the military and political steering of the war effort. We have the head of operations, who is in charge of the movement of troops. We've got the head of production, who determines the allocation of resources to various aspects of the war effort. And then we've got the head of personnel, who makes a lot of decisions regarding command and the generals. And generals play a huge role in the other side of the hill. Now, there is some restructuring that'll take place in the 1942 turn, but prior to that, these roles will change. So you won't have a single player who's always OKW, and that is a good thing because the OKW player can overrule some decisions that the other players make. And I gotta say, if that ran the entire length of the game, I'm sure that would get on some people's last nerve. It would. Now, we do see some of the responsibilities change in 1942. You'll start using that side of the cards. What happens then is the player who is OKW will remain OKW throughout the rest of the game. These will still switch around. So you will not just be only a head of production for the rest of the game. These will change. And another interesting aspect is in 1942, these 3 players are going to get secret agendas. So pretty nice. There is also Black Orchestra in this, so there could be the assassination of Hitler. A coup could take place. And it's important also to point out that this is not the sort of war game where the Germans can win. Germany is not going to win the Second World War. We are not going to see America stay out of the war because Roosevelt didn't get reelected and America decides they're going to stay isolationist. You're not going to see the non-aggression pact stand throughout the entire war with the Soviet Union. The United States and the USSR are going to enter the war. Germany will at some point fall. The whole point to this game is prestige points. Prestige points for the players. And there are a variety of different ways for those players to earn prestige points. I'll get to that in just a few moments. Let's continue with the tour here. So this area here, these are our theaters of operation. So we've got our Western Front, Eastern Front, Southern Front. We've got boxes here that represent various different regions, different areas within those regions that will be fought over. Also shows the alignment of that region, as well as what army group leaders the Axis have in those areas. So I will actually zoom in and talk about movement and combat a little bit later, and you'll get a better look at these region boxes. So we also have the resources track. This is where the head of production is going to determine what aspects of the war effort are going to get resources. So we're going to track our resources here, then we're going to break them up into these categories. So we've got replacements for the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, as well as strategic warfare. We have directives. We have military directives, political directives, and production directives. Now we also have consumer goods. And the thing is, Hitler and the German High Command felt one of the factors that led to Germany's defeat in the First World War was the low morale on the home front. So consumer goods are very important to keep morale up, although at some point you're going to have to cut consumer goods. It's just going to happen. So we also have a project track. This is where we track various different technological projects that we have running. Now, some production directives we just pay the points for and they're automatic. They come into play. Others are going to take more time, more investment. That's where the project track comes in. Got the fanaticism track, which is the fanaticism of the military. We've got the unrest track, of course, that's for the populace. Have a force pool with unassigned armies. We've got our Axis satellite armies that we will place here as well. In some cases, the Germans can use paratroopers. And then we've got our commitment tracks down here. As I pointed out, the USSR, the USA are going to enter the war. No way around it. Down here, we've got a track where this is where we're going to track our prestige points. Prestige points are very important because at the end of the game, when Germany falls, whoever has the most prestige points is the winner. Now, there is an automatic victory condition, and that is if one player has 20 more prestige points than the lowest player has, then the game ends, automatic victory for the player that has the more than 20. All right, so that is the board. That's a look at that. What I want to do now is I want to discuss the variety of different cards that we have that come into play with the other side of the hill. So I'm going to zoom on in. We're going to take a look at those. So let's talk about generals, because generals are a very important aspect of the other side of the hill. So I'm just going to pop some of the general cards out here, and I'll explain what's on these cards. So what you're looking at doing is each player is going to have a group of available generals to them. And every year, more generals will become available, and the players will actually draft the generals to add to their generals deck. Now, there is a limit to how many generals a player can have in their generals deck. And in a 4-player game, it would be 8. So here we show, this is von Rundstedt. They've got a seniority of 10, which is the highest. And seniority comes into play when assigning generals to army groups, OGs, as well as combat command. We also have a confidence level, which the confidence level for von Rundstedt is low. So he really doesn't have Hitler's ear. We have the year that they become available. We show the faction that they are aligned with and what scenarios they are used in. And then they might have a special combat ability, and then they may have a special ability. So as an example, von Rundstedt's special ability is that he's respected. So if he's dismissed, I'll talk about that in a sec. If he's dismissed, he will actually become available again the following year. So with the confidence level here, if a general is leading the troops in a battle and they lose, we actually have these counters here that will be on the theaters. And let's say they lost. We're going to flip this over because now they're questionable. So it's possible that they could be dismissed. So what you're going to do is you're going to get to a point, you're going to roll for all your various different generals who are questionable. And you need to roll lower than this for them to stay in command. So as an example, this is a 2, that's a 6, he's got a 3. He's actually one of Hitler's favorites. If you roll lower, he's fine. If you roll equal to that number, they are not dismissed, but they are marked as a dissident. So they will get a dissident counter. So they're not necessarily trusted, and they actually now belong to the dissident faction. There is the Black Orchestra aspect of the game. so that there could be a coup, Hitler could be overthrown or could be assassinated, and the war comes to an end and the game comes to an end. So we've got that. And what you're going to do is with your various different generals, when there's an opening, each player has an opportunity to nominate one of their generals for that opening. And there's some various different aspects to it. But normally what's going to happen is you need to have the highest seniority or be within one for a possibility to receive that assignment to that command. So generals play a huge part in the game because when you have generals in command of armies that are victorious, you are going to get prestige points. So we've got that. We have military directives. So these are available by year. And remember, we have points in our production table for military directives. So you have to pay to activate this military directive. So this military directive is the invasion of Poland. So it shows there's going to be a combat pawn, which goes into area 1 because each of these regions do have numbers to them. Prerequisite is the season is not winter. The objective is Warsaw. And then what happens if you succeed? So success will earn you this. And once again, military successes will get players prestige points. Very, very important. Now, as the game progresses, we'll have more options. So as an example here, just share, whoops, I'm blocking that off a little bit. There's not going to be a possibility of being able to put all of these directives into action, but you will have different options. So as an example, those are all options for 1940, 1941, 42, so on and so forth. So this is where the historical, or at least the near historical operations, such as Operation Sea Lion, will be put into play. So we've got that. We also have the political directives. So as an example, 1939, we have diplomacy with Romania and Bulgaria, diplomacy Italy, diplomacy Hungary. Once again, we would have to spend points from our production table, this time for political directives, and we need to roll dice to see what happens. In this case here, with these three options, we are trying to make these countries allies. They'll become satellites effectively. So here we need 4 or higher, 4 or higher, 3 or higher. Now there are ways to get modifiers for these rolls as well. And then it's going to tell us, okay, so what happens if you are successful? And it's going to give us a breakdown here. So as an example, the OKW player, if this were to be successful, then they are going to gain a prestige point. And then we get the status of France is Vichy, Yugoslavia is not an Axis satellite, Greece is not an Axis satellite, Hungary is an Axis satellite. So these are our modifiers for our dice here that run along these as well. So pretty cool, pretty nice. We have various different options throughout the years. Some of these will have prerequisites as well. Then we also have production directives. So in 1939, there are 2 here. I do want to point out that we have a variety of additional cards which are going to be Kickstarter exclusives, as far as I understand. So here we would have self-responsibility of industry and Type C submarines. These are not projects, so all we'd have to do is spend the point from our production directives, and these will come into play immediately. So as an example, self-responsibility of industry, our fanaticism will drop by 1, but we will gain 1 resource. And then with the submarines, we get to move our technology marker in strategic warfare to the right to increase it. So we've got those. We've got the Black Orchestra cards, which players are going to earn. And then you're looking at if there is a coup possibility, the players will actually play these cards that have modifiers to them, either positive or negative, for the coup attempt. Now, if you happen to have a secret agenda of being the dissident and there is a coup, that is, and it's a successful coup, that's worth 20 prestige points right there. Now, it can be tough to have the dissident secret agenda because you are actually working against the war effort, but you got to be careful that the OKW doesn't mark you as a traitor, because then at the end of the game, you have -5 prestige points. So we've got this. We have strategic events that take place, some positive for the Axis, some negative for the Axis. Of course, as the war continues, they tend to be far more negative than positive. So we've got those. Those are the different cards we've got. What I'm going to do now is we're going to take a look at the board here. I'm going to actually move this around a little bit. We're going to take a look at Poland, and I am going to set Poland up for the invasion of Poland and talk about combat as well as movement. So let's see, we've got there. We have 5 armies. So one of the cool aspects about the other side of the hill is we don't worry about the allied armies. We don't worry about the Western allies. We don't worry about the USSR. All we concern ourselves with are our armies. So we have panzer armies, regular armies, reduced armies, and then satellite armies. And we have corresponding dice. These are the dice with the custom faces I was talking about previously. So in this situation here, taking a look at Poland, we have the ability to actually have 2 army groups. So let's do, well, we had von Rundstedt there anyway. So let's see who else we got. All right, just as an example, let's say that they were assigned for that. If we hadn't invaded, then this is essentially what we'd be looking at. It would be something like this. But since 1939 scenario actually starts off with us in the midst of the invasion of Poland, it's going to be like so. So this is going to tell us that this region here has a stacking limit of 5 armies. There are some areas that we actually can't put armies in. If we do control this, we have to worry about resistance. I'm going to flip this over since we are fighting over this. So this is disputed. This is our control disk. This is the Western Allies control disk. So let's talk about movement. So as far as the movement, that is going to be the head of operations who handles that. They are going to determine both operational movement and strategic movement. So operational movement, we can move armies within the same front as long as we have a control disk in that region that we're moving to. And it's going to be determined the number of armies we can move based on our air and naval control of the Eastern Front. So if it's 2, then we can move 2 armies. Now, this is during each operations phase. We also have strategic movement, which allows us to move armies from one location to a strategic movement box, which is in Germany. And then in the next operations step, we could move them to another location that we have a control disk on. We can also cross into other theaters. For the most part, movement's pretty easy. Now, we can also move to adjacent locations if we don't have a control disk. So essentially, we would be attacking. So we could move into Belarus, of course, if we want to declare war on the Soviet Union. But see, we've got a line here. So that means it is connected by land. So it is very easy for us to traverse that. All right, so let's talk about combat. So what we're going to do here is we have to nominate a general to lead our forces. Remember, these are our army group leaders. They are not our combat generals. So we've got our generals here. And each of the players, once again, can nominate generals to lead the attack. Keeping in mind, the seniority is going to come into play. So if there is a tie between seniority, then the head of personnel gets to make the decision on that. So as an example here, we've got Hitler's favorite. Here we have the controlling player may reroll one die in the allied combat roll. New result must be applied. What we'll do is, let's say as an example that this is our general who has been assigned. So he is activated. And we are going to get to roll 5 gray dice. Now, there are only 4 gray dice that I've got, so we're going to re-roll one of those dice. And then, because we don't track the Soviet or the Western allies as far as their armies, we're going to flip a card from our combat deck. And then we're going to take a look at it. So we're going to take a peek. You know what? I'll just lay it right there. So it shows us 1939, 1940. This is for the Western allies. We would have here, this is strategic warfare. This is if they're on defense and if they're attacking. So here we see they're going to get 2 dice. So we'll take 2 of those dice. Let's talk about the faces. So these are hits. These are hits if the battle's taking place on a plains terrain area, which it is. So this is plains. This is blue is actually river. So this counts as a hit. This artillery piece is for the Germans on the defensive if they have a particular large guns project completed. So that counts as a hit. And then we also have event cards. On the Western Allies, this will reduce our air naval control by 1. That is a hit. Once again, that is a hit on the planes and event. So what we would do is roll all the dice at once. So we've got 2 of the Western Allies dice, and then we have the 4 gray. Wow, all hits. So we've got 2 hits there. We've got 4 hits. We get to roll 1 more die. 5 hits. So all that matters is who has the most hits. That's it. All that matters, most hits. So in this case, it's 5 against 2. We don't even need to re-roll a die because they're only hits. What we would have done is if one of these came up like that, I would have looked to re-roll the die so that we don't have to drop our air naval control by 1. So what happens here is we are going to push the defenders into Warsaw. We're going to move to there. And if the next area is plains or river, then what we can do is we can actually advance a second time. So it's essentially the blitzkrieg. So in order to do that, we have to reduce one of our armies. So to do that, we would drop the gray, put the white, because that is a reduced army. And then we can take Warsaw. And that would actually complete our objective for our military directive, and then we would get the benefit of that. We would also mark this as being under our control. So this is an occupied country. That, in essence, is the combat. There are some other minor rules depending on situations and that, but for the most part, that is combat. Now, as the war progresses, you also do have a Western offensive step so that the Western allies will be fighting. And then we also have the Soviets. So the Soviets will have offenses as well. So what we're looking at here is we have these pawns. So you got the Soviets, we've got the Western allies, we also have the Germans. Now, interestingly enough, combat cannot take place unless a pawn is placed. And for the German player, it is the OKW who places the combat pawns. So it is possible for armies to be all prepared to invade and attack, and then the OKW doesn't drop a pawn there, thus stalling the offensive. So kind of interesting there. Now, as far as defending, we're just simply looking at the opposite direction, right? So if let's say the Soviets were attacking and they were able to, let's do that. Let's say they were able to push us out, then they would get a control marker here. We would suddenly go back to being disputed. And if we lose a battle, we have to reduce our army by a step. And of course, remember, we flip these guys over because they lost, so it's possible that they will be dismissed. So a lot of cool little mechanics going on in the game, but none of them are like absolutely overwhelming by any stretch of the imagination. So let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts about the other side of the hill and talk about who I think is really going to enjoy this game. So the first thing I want to mention is, even though this is a pre-production copy of the game, it is really nicely done. If this turns out to be the finished product, big thumbs up. Now, I will point out once again that I do think the rule books do need another once-over for the English localization, and there are some aspects of the game that are located only on the player aid chart that I think would be best served to also be included in the rule books too, because a lot of times, like myself personally, I'll read a rule book, I won't have all the components of the game right there in front of me when I start taking a peek at the rules. So it did take a little bit of time to find out, what do the faces on these dice mean? So there is that. When I first opened this up, I did think to myself, oh my gosh, did I bite off a little bit more than I can chew? Because this did look far more complex than it actually is in reality. It does have complexity. I'm not telling you that this is an easy game to just jump right on into and play. It is not. And I would certainly recommend do what I did and share the game with your other players so they can take a look at the components, they can read the rules, look at the cards, get an idea about the game before you sit down to play. And when you first learn to play multiplayer, play it cooperatively. But you got to get to the point where you're playing competitively, because that is where this design really shines. And I think it is excellent in that regards. I'm not trying to talk you out of picking it up as a solitaire gamer. I'm not trying to talk you into not picking it up if you happen to be a cooperative gamer. All I'm saying is that to get the most out of this design, you've got to play it competitively. And you will be really pleasantly surprised by how different the game actually becomes when you're playing it competitively. I think that this is an excellent game aimed at people who are used to medium complexity or higher as far as war games. Now, I will point out, my best friend Elliot, who played, he's used to playing war games, not a ton, but he does play some, and he does play games that have a rather high complexity level of all sorts of genres. Now, I was a bit concerned as far as bringing on his son Brian, my nephew Cameron, as well as my brother, because they don't tend to play meaty, heavyweight games. So I was a little concerned that it might be over their gaming heads, I guess I'll say. But it wasn't. Granted, it took a while for everybody to grasp the game, but once everybody understood the different steps and their responsibilities, they caught on rather quickly. So I was pleasantly surprised at how easy it was compared to how I was looking at it originally when I cracked open the rules and thought, uh-oh, what have I gotten into here? I will mention that if you are the sort of gamer who, when you're playing games with multiplayers, if your feelings are easily hurt when people gang up against you or they throw a wrench into your plans, obviously, this is not going to be up your alley, especially playing competitively. But I gotta say, I think most war gamers out there don't have to concern themselves about that. I am really impressed by the other side of the hill from NAC Games. This is going to be a go-to if you are looking for grand strategy as far as multiplayer for World War II. Yes, granted, you are the German High Command, but keep in mind, there's no way Germany's going to win, so you don't have to have that monkey on your back. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this Kickstarter preview, it'll also let you know when I stream my live show, The Gaming Gang Dispatch, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for checking out this Kickstarter preview. And until I see you next time, here's hoping all of you out there get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.